Fall is my favorite season. Cool air, early sunsets, the sound of leaves scraping along the pavement. But there's something about this time of year that brings out more than just nostalgia. Maybe it's the long nights, the fog rolling in off empty roads, or the way the wind makes old houses sound like they're breathing. Every year around this time, I get sent stories that remind me how fragile that comfort really is. Stories that start out normal, someone walking home, staying at a cabin, renting a new place, and end in ways that still haunt them years later. These are 3 true disturbing fall horror stories. Make sure you're somewhere safe. Turn down the lights, and let's begin. Story 1. The Scarecrow at Maple Hollow. My name is Jenna, and I grew up in a tiny town in Vermont called Maple Hollow. If you've ever been to New England in the fall, you know it's one of the most beautiful places in the country. Bright orange leaves, crisp air that smells like wood smoke and cinnamon, the sound of geese flying south. For most of my life, fall was my favorite season. Our town was small, less than 2,000 people, and everyone knew each other. The big event every year was the Harvest Night Festival. It was like a mix between a fair and a market. Hay rides, caramel apples, pumpkin contests, and all that small-town charm. But the festival always took place right next to this old scarecrow, standing on the edge of the pumpkin field behind my family's property. The scarecrow had always been there. Nobody in town could really remember who made it or when it was put up. My mum said it was already there when she was a kid. It stood tall, about 6 feet, wearing a torn brown coat and a burlap sack tied over its head with a crude stitched grin. Every year people joked about it being our town's unofficial mascot. As a kid, I loved it. We'd take photos next to it every October. But as I got older, something about that grin started to feel off. You know how some things just start to creep you out for no reason? Like the longer you look, the less it feels like a thing, and more like someone pretending to be one. The fall of 2017 was the year everything changed. My parents had asked me to help decorate our booth for the Harvest Festival. We sold pumpkin pies and apple cider. I was there late one afternoon setting up string lights when I looked across the field and noticed the Scarecrow's head was turned slightly more toward the road than usual. I remember thinking, that's weird, maybe the wind shifted it. But there was no wind. The air that day was still, dead still. I shrugged it off, but the next morning I noticed something stranger. There were small piles of hay scattered along the fence, as if someone had been dragging something through the field. Dad said raccoons might have gotten into it. But when I looked closer, I saw long boot-shaped prints in the dirt, too big to be mine, and not my dad's either. A few nights later, after the festival ended, I stayed behind to help pack up the booths. Everyone else had gone home. It was close to 10 p.m., cold enough that my breath was visible in the air. I remember turning off the last light strand, and as I looked across the dark field, I froze. The scarecrow was gone. For a second, I thought maybe someone had moved it. But as I scanned the field with my flashlight, I saw it, standing about 30 feet closer to the barn, half hidden in the fog. Its head was tilted, that stitched grin pointed right at me. I yelled out, "Who's there?" thinking maybe one of the other workers was pranking me. No answer. The only sound was the wind brushing through the dry corn stalks. I grabbed my phone to take a picture, but when I looked up again, the scarecrow was back in its usual place at the far end of the field. I remember my stomach twisting so hard I almost threw up. I went straight home that night and locked my window. The next morning, my mum said she found muddy boot prints leading up to the porch steps, stopping right under my bedroom window. That's when my dad decided to take the scarecrow down. He and a couple of his friends went out there, loaded it into the bed of his truck, and said they'd toss it at the dump. For a while, everything was normal again. Weeks went by. The leaves fell, and winter came early that year. But one night, right before Thanksgiving, I was up late watching TV when I heard tapping on my window. 3 soft taps. I froze. Our house was 2 stories high. There was no way anyone could be outside that window without a ladder. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the tapping came again, louder this time. I got up, walked slowly to the window, and pulled back the curtain just an inch. There in the dim porch light stood a figure in a brown coat, head wrapped in burlap, looking up at me from the yard. The grin on that sack looked wider now, darker in places, like it had been soaked. I screamed for my dad. He ran outside with his shotgun, but by the time he got out there, whoever, or whatever it was gone. The next morning, the Scarecrow was standing in the middle of the field again, exactly where it used to be. A few weeks later, hunters found something buried shallow in the woods behind our property. It was a man's body, or what was left of it, decomposed, wearing a brown coat. The sheriff said it looked like he'd been dead for years, maybe a decade. They never found out who he was. My dad burned the Scarecrow after that, said he didn't care about the police report or superstition. He soaked it in gas and lit it right there in the field. I remember watching the burlap head curl and blacken in the flames, and for just a second it looked like the grin was twitching, like it was smiling wider as it burned. We moved away from Maple Hollow the next summer. I'm 26 now, living 3 states away, and every October I still wake up around 3 a.m., hearing that same slow tapping on my window. And every time, I'm too scared to look. There's something about the quiet of rural places in the fall that makes everything feel off. But sometimes, even in the middle of nowhere, you're not as alone as you think. This next story takes us to a small town where a simple night out turned into something no one could explain. Story 2: The Sound Behind the Leaves. My name is Travis, and back in 2015 I worked as a park ranger at Pine Valley Reserve in upstate New York. It wasn't a big park, a few thousand acres of hiking trails, a small lake, and a lot of forest that felt endless once you got deep enough in. I loved that job. I loved the quiet, the isolation, the smell of pine and cold dirt in the morning. But the fall of 2015 was when everything changed for me, and to this day I can't step foot in the woods without remembering what I heard that night. The fall season in Pine Valley was beautiful. The trees would turn bright red and gold, the air crisp and cool. Families would come up from the city to go hiking and camp under the stars. My shifts were usually in the late afternoon through the night. I liked the peace that came once the sun went down, the sound of crickets, the distant howls of coyotes. Around mid-October, we started getting reports from campers that something strange was happening near the old North Trail. People said they heard voices whispering outside their tents in the middle of the night. Some said it sounded like a man and woman arguing quietly. Others said it was just a single voice, repeating words they couldn't understand. A few campers even packed up and left before dawn. My supervisor thought it was kids from town messing around. Apparently, there was a group of teenagers who liked to sneak into the park after hours, so I was told to patrol that area more often. The first time I heard the whispers myself was October 19th. It was just after 2 a.m. The air was cold enough to see my breath, and the forest was so still I could hear the hum of my own flashlight. I parked my truck near the closed trailhead and started walking. The leaves on the ground were damp from rain earlier that evening. Each step made a soft squish. For the first 20 minutes, everything was silent. Then I heard it, a faint murmur like someone talking from far away. I turned off my flashlight and just listened. The sound was coming from deep in the trees ahead of me. At first, I thought maybe it was a radio or a phone speaker, the way voices blur together when you are hearing them through static. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't electronic. It was human. I called out, "Hello, Park Ranger here. You're in a closed area." The voices stopped immediately. Total silence. I waited about 30 seconds, shining my light around the trees, but there was nothing. As I started walking again, I could hear leaves crunching behind me like footsteps, slow, deliberate, matching my pace. I turned around fast, and again, nothing. I remember my chest tightening, the kind of instinctive fear that doesn't come from logic. It is just something in your body screaming at you that you are not alone. I got back to my truck and sat inside for a while with the engine running, staring into the darkness. That's when I saw something move. About 50 feet away, between two trees, there was a shape, human-sized, standing perfectly still. I shined my spotlight on it, and for a split second I saw what looked like a man, thin, pale, wearing dark clothes, but his feet were bare, no shoes. In that freezing weather. Before I could even react, he turned and stepped back into the shadows, gone in less than a second. I drove back to the ranger station as fast as I could. The next morning, I went out with another ranger named Eric to check the area. We didn't find anyone, but we did find something strange. A circle of leaves about 6 feet across, all pressed perfectly flat into the dirt, like someone had been lying there for a long time. The leaves around it were untouched, no footprints leading to or from the spot. It was as if the forest itself had laid them down that way. We joked about it, said maybe deer had been bedding down there. But deer don't flatten leaves in perfect circles, and deer don't whisper your name in the dark. For a while I tried to put it out of my mind. But a few nights later it happened again. I was doing another patrol alone around 1:30 a.m. this time. I parked by the lake trail about a mile from where I'd heard the voices before. I turned off my truck, opened the door, and that's when I heard it. A single whisper right behind me. It said my name. I froze. There was no one around, no other cars, no campers, just woods and darkness. I spun around, flashlight out, and my beam caught movement. Someone slipping behind a tree about 20 feet away. I started walking toward it, slowly, heart pounding, telling myself over and over it had to be a person, maybe some drunk teenager trying to scare me. But when I got close, I found another flattened circle of leaves, same size, same shape, right where the figure had been standing. No footprints. I remember kneeling down to touch it, and the second my hand brushed the leaves, a whisper came right next to my ear. It wasn't English. It was like dozens of voices overlapping at once, speaking so close I could feel the breath on my neck. I dropped my flashlight, grabbed it, and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I slammed the door shut and started the engine, breathing hard, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the keys. I turned on the headlights, and standing just at the edge of the beam was the same pale man from before. He wasn't moving, he was just standing there, head tilted to the side, staring. His eyes were open so wide they caught the light like glass. I blinked once, and he was gone. I quit my job 3 weeks later. The official reason I gave was stress, but the truth is, I couldn't stand being out there anymore. Every night I'd hear things in the woods behind my cabin, the whispering, the leaves rustling when there was no wind. I even started finding those same flattened leaf circles behind my cabin, each night a little closer to my back door. The final night before I left, I woke up to the sound of my porch steps creaking. I lay still, holding my breath, and I heard it, the soft sound of leaves brushing against the wooden boards, like someone was dragging their feet across them. Then, just barely above the wind, came the whisper. It said my name again. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it through the window. There was nothing there. But when I looked down at the ground the next morning, the dirt was covered in hundreds of small, perfect leaf circles, pressed flat, overlapping each other like prints in snow. The park shut down that part of the reserve a few years later because of a wildfire, and the whole North Trail is gone now, burned down to ash. But sometimes when I take walks alone in the fall, I still hear that same faint sound behind me, the whisper moving just out of reach, and the crunch of leaves following wherever I go. Some things you can run from, others stay with you, the kind of memories that come back every time the air gets cold. Our final story tonight comes from someone who thought she was just moving into a new apartment for the season. But what she found there was something that never really left. Story 3. The Fall Apartment. My name is Lauren. In 2019, I moved into a small apartment in western Massachusetts. It wasn't much. One bedroom, old wooden floors that creaked when you walked, and windows that rattled whenever the wind picked up. But it was cheap, and I was starting a new job in town, so I took it. It was early October when I moved in, the kind of fall where the air smells like rain and wood smoke, and every evening feels just a little darker than it should. The building was old, built in the 1940s. It had 4 floors and maybe a dozen tenants total. Most of the people there were quiet, older folks, students, or people who worked nights like me. My apartment was on the top floor, corner unit, facing a big oak tree that scraped against my window when it got windy. For the first week, everything was normal. I'd come home late, make tea, sit by the window and watch the leaves blow down the street. But by the second week, I started hearing things. It began with footsteps. Late at night, around 2 a.m., I'd hear slow, heavy steps coming down the hallway outside my door. Our building had old floors, so creaks weren't unusual, but these sounded deliberate. Step, pause, step, pause. They would always stop right in front of my apartment. Then nothing. At first, I thought it was the neighbor from across the hall, a middle-aged man who kept to himself. But one night I checked. I waited until the steps came again, then quickly looked through the peephole. No one was there. The hallway was empty. A few nights later, I was brushing my teeth when I heard what sounded like someone whispering outside my bathroom window. I turned off the faucet and listened. There it was again. Faint, raspy, like words being dragged through a dry throat. I leaned closer, thinking maybe someone was outside on the fire escape, but when I looked, there was nothing. Just the dark outline of the oak tree. Its branches were swaying against the glass. But the whisper came again right after the branch stopped moving. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it, but it kept happening. Every night, a few minutes after 2 a.m., either the footsteps in the hall or that whispering outside the window, sometimes both. On October 17th, I came home from work late. The wind was strong that night, and the street was covered in red and yellow leaves. As I unlocked my door, I noticed a strange smell, like damp earth and rot, the smell you get when leaves sit too long under rain. It was faint, but coming from inside my apartment. I checked everywhere, the kitchen sink, the bathroom, the trash, nothing. Then I realized the smell was strongest near the window by my bed. When I pulled the curtains aside, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Someone had pressed a handprint against the glass. It was large, muddy, and slightly smeared, like someone had leaned on it from the outside. But I was on the 4th floor. There was no balcony, no ledge, no way anyone could have reached that window. I cleaned it off with a towel, trying to convince myself it was just dirt blown by the wind. But later that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my window sliding open. It wasn't loud, just the slow, careful sound of metal scraping metal. I sat up, frozen. The window was locked. I knew it was. Then I heard breathing, low, ragged, right beside the curtain. I turned on my lamp so fast it fell over and shattered the bulb. When the light flashed, I caught a glimpse of the curtain moving, like something was backing away from it. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I called the landlord. He came by, checked the locks, and told me it was impossible for anyone to open the window from the outside. It was rusted shut halfway up. I told him about the footsteps in the hallway too, but he just shrugged. Said old buildings make sounds, especially in the fall when the air shifts. I wanted to believe him, but that night proved him wrong. I had just gone to bed when I heard something fall in the kitchen, a soft clink like a spoon hitting the floor. I got up, walked down the short hallway, and flicked on the light. The room was empty, but there were wet footprints on the floor, leading from the kitchen sink to the middle of the living room. They stopped about 5 feet from where I stood. The prints were large, wider than mine, and the water looked dirty, like rainwater mixed with soil. I called my friend Ethan, who lived nearby, and begged him to come over. He stayed the night on my couch. Nothing happened while he was there, but when he left the next morning, he said something that still bothers me. He said he heard me walking around while he tried to sleep, except I wasn't. I had been in my bedroom with the door closed the entire time. A week later, the whispering changed. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the apartment. The first time it happened, I was half asleep and thought it was a dream. A low voice near my ear, repeating something over and over. But when I sat up, it didn't stop. The whisper moved across the room into the corner, where the shadows were thickest. And that smell, the wet, rotten leaf smell, came flooding back, stronger than ever. I turned on every light in the apartment, heart racing, but the corner was empty. I stayed awake until sunrise, lights on, TV playing just to have some noise. For the next few days, I barely slept. The noises, the footsteps, the whispers, they all blended together until I couldn't tell what was real. One night I called Ethan again, crying. He told me to record what I was hearing. So I did. That night, I set my phone on the nightstand and hit record before I went to bed. I woke up at 3 a.m. to complete silence. But when I listened to the recording the next morning, my stomach turned. It started with soft rustling, like fabric moving. Then came faint, slow breathing. After a few minutes, there was a whisper. A single phrase, repeated 3 times, each one clearer than the last. She shouldn't be here. I moved out the next day, packed whatever I could fit in my car, and didn't even wait for my deposit. Ethan helped me find a new place across town, and for a while, I tried to forget everything. A few months later, I ran into my old landlord at the grocery store. I almost didn't talk to him, but curiosity got the better of me. I asked if he'd rented the apartment again. He said he hadn't. The unit was still empty. Then he looked at me a little strangely and asked, "You didn't see the news?" I told him no. He pulled out his phone and showed me an article, a short local piece from early October 2019, the week before I moved in. Apparently, a woman had gone missing in that same building. She lived in the unit below mine. Her name was Lisa, and she was last seen walking into the building one rainy night. They found her a week later, buried under a pile of wet leaves in the wooded lot behind the property. The police said it looked like she'd fallen or been dragged there during the storm. No suspect was ever found. I didn't say anything. I just handed his phone back and walked away. That was 6 years ago. I live in another state now. But every fall, when the air gets cold and the leaves start piling up outside my window, I swear I can still smell that same damp rot creeping in. And sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet, I hear a faint whisper behind the sound of the leaves brushing the glass. Just 3 words over and over. She shouldn't be here. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, it's hard to ignore how different the world feels in the fall. The air gets colder, the nights stretch longer, and sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you might hear something in the dark that wasn't meant for you. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to stay alert this season. Lock your doors, keep your lights on, and remember, not every noise outside is the wind. Sleep tight and happy fall.